everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of the Study Room Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Robinson. This is my co-host, Evan Wright, over here.
Stingers up.
And this is our guest, Carlos Hernandez.
Hey, what's up?
This podcast was originally created for my English 5 project, where we have to discuss a specific issue or just topic in general, and we have to create a podcast about it. Now, this specific podcast in general, we will be talking about video essays on YouTube and either how good they are or the problem with them. So, this video essay that we've chosen to talk about is entitled Breaking Bad and How the War on Drugs Affects Everybody. And this video essay was created by Ali Nisa, very wonderful creator. I actually enjoy his content a lot. So we're just going to be talking about how he uses rhetoric in his specific situations and how he kind of drives his point, how he also fails to drive his point, and just like how well he did, like how well of a job he did on his video essay in general. So, whatever you like to start off.
Well, I would like to start off with his analysis on Hank, on like how sometimes like police are like corrupt on like the DEA, and then that like sometimes that like he grows as a character, but the realization where the DEA has to use a lot of force, and even though they do catch like the drug lords and all that, they still had to use excessive force. That if they were to put on trial, like if Hank were to ever be like charged for anything by the other character Jesse, he would have definitely not won because of like the amount of like just brute force he had to do without having to do the paperwork. It's just an example of what the war on drugs would do.
Yeah, and that's actually like one of the interesting things about that is, especially in his video essay, I think his two strongest points were like with his analyzation of Hank and Jesse. Like with Hank, it was very much criticizing the DEA, and he used like a lot of pathos and definitely a lot of like logos involved in it. Like, and even though that's like one of my issues is that he didn't put in any actual like hard statistics in his video,
Right.
when I think that definitely would have like strengthened his point. But like, I think especially from the video, one of my favorite lines that he says is like when he calls the DEA like a machine. They call it the DEA machine, cranking out officers just to like get their numbers high. And I think that like set of pathos kind of like really like embodies the DEA as just kind of like a machine that just tries to crank out as many numbers as they can, try to get as many arrests as they can, just as many officers out in the field. I think that was definitely like really good way to kind of strengthen his point. Another thing with Jesse too is that he really like makes us feel for him, because when he was explaining how like, even though Walter White was like sort of not only like I guess kind of a mentor in the show, he like constantly put him down. Like he killed like whoever actually cared for him, like Mike and was it Jane? I think it was Jane.
Yeah, it was Jane.
Yeah, I think like yeah, like it's just like those were like one of the only two characters that like truly cared for Jesse and like wanted to see him thrive, and that's just like Heisenberg kind of not letting that happen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so what I would also what you touched on a little bit, but I would like to go more into is his use of pathos. And so, what was this guy's name again?
Ali Nissan.
Ali Nissan. So he talks about this thing that I've actually heard in talks about like issues with racism and discrimination, and the idea that it dehumanizes everybody involved. And so when he talks about that in relation to Jesse and Hank and Walter, I think Jesse is the best example of like the effects that has on typical people, and then the other two, Hank and Walter, are really good examples of the way that it can corrupt people in power, right? And so because Hank has power in the DEA, and then Walter has this power because he has this ability to provide this.
I mean, he had power in like the drug trade.
Yes, exactly. To make these drugs that nobody else could. And so Jesse's kind of just in the middle, just trying to exist, and he's trying to do his best and be the best kind of person he is. But Walter's been so corrupted. And then Hank's arc, he does become a better man, but it's still in this system of the DEA, and where he can't really truly like he talks about Hank changes, but nothing changes with the DEA, right? And so it doesn't matter how personally you develop or anything, because this kind of system and the issues with the war on drugs are so pervasive that it doesn't matter how much personal growth you have or how much personal degradation you have. In Walter's case, it's all the same.
Yeah, and that's like another interesting thing. I'll let you have your moment a bit, but like that's one thing I found like really interesting is like say you haven't watched Breaking Bad at all, right? And you look at Hank, Walter, and Jesse, right? You'd see as like Hank as like a good cop, DEA agent, like he's doing the right thing. Walter White, just a family man, like high school chemistry teacher, like doing the right thing. And you see Jesse, like a junkie scum, a lowlife. And in reality, like Jesse was the most morally correct character in the show, like, and it just kind of sucks that like the public views him as a bad person when in reality he was like one of the most kind people in the show.
And this show like really takes back in like 2008, like I guess like where the show takes place in the I guess the George Bush era, where it's like the war on drugs too, and also this also implies to like how cops could just replace each other too. Like for example, like Hank has a lot of like trauma from busting a lot of like drug crimes, and he's witnessed a lot of like that one episode where he just saw his fellow like his new mates just like either just lose their limbs because of an explosion, and then so just for him to just experience that trauma and has to go back and like have to go where did he have to go to like be like El Paso?
Yeah.
He had to go to El Paso, even though he's literally experienced like the worst part of it, of like the war on drugs, and then like also the arrest too. Like he can't go through it again, and then so like and then him trying to be a good cop doesn't really change what the DEA is as a whole, and so this also applies to Jesse too, as Jesse's a junkie, and society views junkies as just like low lives and that they cannot be saved. But in reality, Jesse just has basic morals that Walt ends up losing because of his drug empire, and also Hank just like losing himself too.
Yeah, and like that's another like big part about Nissa's analysis is that he makes us really feel for Hank, even though like a lot of us or a lot of the people watching the show like can even despise him just because of like how sometimes like racist he can be, like especially towards like Hispanics and Asians. Like he's definitely racist toward them, no doubt, and like discriminatory. But it's just like we feel for him because like he just experienced like the most traumatic thing of his life. And the DEA is just like, nope, go to El Paso. Like, you're like, oh, you're okay now? Oh, you're going back in the field already. It's just like they don't really care about the person in general. They just care about getting their numbers up, getting arrests. And, like, that's definitely one thing that how he conveyed his point is, like, it affects not really the DEA as a whole, but, like, the individuals who work under the DEA. And that's definitely how he showed that through Hank, and I thought that was like a really good analyzation of his character.
Yeah, I also like in there how he talks about, like, he makes this distinction between a good society, like a society that's trying to help the people would do this, and he says like they would try to do things to help the junkies instead, and people that are, well, calling them that is probably not good, but people that are addicted to drugs and stuff to try to help them instead. And instead, in our world, in the world that actually exists, we've militarized the police, which has made drug dealers have to
defend themselves.
Yeah, have to defend themselves. Yes, and so all these things that kind of like make everything more and more intense. And make it more dangerous for everybody else involved, other than the drug deal that aren't drug dealers or DEA agents, right? And so I like that distinction that he makes and how he talks about the issues that are caused for common people who might not even use drugs, but are in neighborhoods where there's a lot of drug activity, or maybe people that do use drugs but are trying to get clean, but there's nowhere that they can go, or nobody, like there's no because they're criminalized. There's no institutions that will help them. And so it kind of does a good he kind of does a good job to demonstrate the issues of our world, and saying, oh, maybe this could help, or if something like this were to happen, that might help people do better.
Yeah, and I also think like that also directly ties into like his analysis of Walter White, right? Because like just like you said, with like the heavy militarization of the DEA and just like how illegal it has become for just like any criminal activity like with drugs or whatever, it's that if you're in going in the criminal world, it's literally just survival instinct, and that's really what caused Walter White to just go down his evil path to become Heisenberg, right? Because there's nothing stopping, and this is something that I said, there's nothing stopping Walter White from getting his like face curb stomped, because they can do it. They're already committing crime. What's to stop them from committing more crime? And that's like one of the main issues is that because there's already so much violence kind of that's, I guess, being threatened toward them, the only way that they can respond is by just being more violent back, being more like defending yourself. And I think that's also what caused Walter White to like go down his path to evils, because like, well, he's trying to survive. He's trying to make money for his family. So he's going to do everything he can to stay as safe as he can and to make sure he gets out alive. If that includes, killing children, if that includes constantly putting down his partner, putting him down, killing his other partners like Gus Fring, Mike Ehrmantraut. Like, it's kind of not only sad, but you feel scared as he does. And like originally, like you feel scared for him because like he obviously feels scared because he's never been in this type of situation before. And then like as he kind of goes down his path of evil, it's just like we know like nothing. Like he can get himself out of any situation, but it's not the cost of him. It's going to be cost of the others around him.
I see.
Yeah, and so I think what you just said about Walter, because if you look at Walter too, when he in the very beginning of the show, what was really interesting is that Walter was the most innocent, right? And then Jesse comes in and is like, hey, and kind of almost corrupts him in that way, right? And starts Walter across this path that he can't go back from, and so he starts selling drugs and doing all these things that are associated with it, because to him it becomes, because at first he was just like, well, it would help out my bottom line, like it would help out my money situation, my home situation, and just having more money, right, and being able to provide for the people that I love. I have a sick kid, and stuff like that. But it causes this whole snowball effect where Walter gets into this situation and starts becoming this person, because how he sees the world starts to shift, I guess, and at some point there's no way for him to go back to the person that he was before he was selling drugs and before he was a criminal, right? And so I think Walter's story is really interesting in that way.
Yeah, and it's like one of those ones where like he's a villain, but you still feel for him,
Yeah.
and it's like not really, not even an anti-hero. It's just that it's it's a relatable villain. It's a relatable villain.
I can see that. Yeah.
Like, because no doubt the things that he's done is like really bad,
I still love him though.
But
No, I see what you're saying.
yeah, and it's just like that just kind of shows how like pretty much anybody can get sucked into like the crime, like with the drug trade. And it's just that like it's a slippery slope. Like once you get in, like even if you're like, I'm gonna try drugs one time, and that's it, chances are you're gonna keep doing it again, and you're gonna fall into it, and then like most extreme scenario is that you end up killing a person because of something related to drugs, or yourself. Yeah, that's another thing, and that's like definitely like what he brought up with the systemic issues of the way that they treat drug users is not to like, oh, we want you to get help. It's that you're a criminal now. You need to go to prison. You need to die. You need to do like all these horrible things that like should happen to you. And that's definitely one issue that he brought up. that he definitely personified. I think especially with Jesse and Walter. I think Jesse was like more, not like. I guess Jesse was just like the effects of like what can happen to you, and then Walter's was like the effects of like how it changes you as like a person. And I think that's definitely something to note in his rhetorical analysis.
And also, Hank and Heisenberg or Walter White are basically like kind of like the same side, the same. They're like in the same coin of a different side. I don't know how to explain it.
Are you saying like they come from the same background or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like basically they're all driven by ego.
Okay.
Like Heisenberg or Walter White kept on going because of his ego too, and his ego would get damaged. He would go out of his way.
Making the best stuff and
Yeah.
yeah.
And then so and then also Hank too just tries to be like the best officer too, and also just trying to rank up numbers is just like, oh man, I got the rest of the day. And then also like just being at a high level too. Same thing with Walter White too. He also wants to like, because he already got enough money and he could just stop it there, but instead with his ego being driven, he kept on pushing it until he starts losing himself. Same thing with Hank too, until he starts experiencing trauma, and that's where he like starts to stop. But with Walter, he just didn't stop.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I think Nisa did like really well was making us understand where like every character, especially like Hank and Walter, came from, like where they're trying to come from. So that like, I think in one episode of Breaking Bad, they're trying to alter like Walter's like formula for the blue meth, and he's like refusing to do it because he knows that his stuff is like the most pure like methamphetamine in the industry, and like he's literally trying to, I don't know, he's trying to like prove and like he's the best in the business, and like that's why he's trying to start his own empire. Like, and I can't remember if he showed it. Can't remember if it was him or another like YouTuber, but they were saying like in the Breaking Bad like finale when he was saying like, oh, everything I did, you're expecting him to say like did for the family, but in reality it was he did it for himself because he liked it, he was good at it, and he wanted to be the best in the industry, and that's definitely something that is definitely an ego-driven point, and I think that would have been something great that Ali could have like used in his video. Yeah.
Same thing also implies that he could have went more into depth with like Gus Fring or like Mike, but he went kind of short on those, and then just mentioned more of the main characters, which is really nice. But also, there's other characters that also played a role too, to like for Walter White's like descent into like evilness. And there's also this YouTuber that also made like an evil analysis for both Gus and Walter, and that's what I kind of wish he did.
Yeah, and I think Gus, he didn't play as a major part. Or it was a major part in it, but like he kind of was more of a side character too. Like right. I think like Walter White definitely, because I think he also mentioned it with Tuco, is that like when he met Tuco, that's kind of when his like fight or flight instincts kicked in, and like he like it was at that point when like he had that like instance with Tuco. It's like he knew he had to like do everything to survive, and I think that's also kind of the same thing with Gus, is that he needed to get Gus out of the picture to keep like him and Jesse together, and I think that's like another thing that's just like fight or flight that happened in it. So I think like he could have included some instances with Gus. I feel like it wasn't necessarily needed. I think Tuco was a better option to like to show like the fight or flight within Walter White, and he even used that in his analysis, and I think it was a good job that he did. Would you like to say anything?
Yeah, so just going a little bit back to the idea of like ego and stuff, I think even more because the video did explain like the ego and that aspect of it, but I think it could have gone more into depth, and like to me that's the idea of like achieving greatness. And Walter White was kind of stuck at a dead-end job, right? And he was a really, really good chemist, but he was teaching high school, and not that that's a bad thing, but for him personally, he wasn't fulfilled, you know, and you could see that in the early episodes and in the early seasons. And so then when he started doing this thing, stingers up, when he started doing this thing, like where he could succeed and he could make money and he could be this thing to be respected and feared and whatever that he ever wanted in his life, that's how he could do it. And then Hank, the same thing, but with the other side, with the DEA. And so he's like, oh, I'm willing to do anything the DEA says because this is how I can achieve greatness. I could be a great officer, and I can be remembered in this way, right? And so I think that kind of motivation, kind of, because we talked a little bit earlier about how people get into this kind of stuff, right? And I think that has a lot to do with it, right? They just want to do what they feel is right, and so these institutions kind of validate them in that way, right? And the DEA for both ways, because well, I guess it doesn't validate Walter White, but it definitely validates Hank, and it works to, in a way, kind of like say that this drug trade is so successful, we have to have a whole task force to deal with it, and we have to. So I guess in a way it kind of does, but yeah. So that validation and that search for like trying to do the right thing, I think has a lot to do with it, and I think the video could have maybe talked about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think something similar to that point is that when he talked about like this is like very like at the start of the his video essays that he kind of showed like DEA agents as like stormtrooper like when like very first episode, they send a task force just to take down like one dude making pot in his home, and you have like 6 or 7 DEA agents like gas masks fully up, like ballistic helmets, Kevlar vests, like a full like automatic rifle. It's just like all that just to take down one guy. It's just like it's not only is it kind of like it's too much, but just like kind of shows that he kind of showed that there's no face behind the DEA. And then like on one side, yeah, no face behind the DEA. They're just like mindless stormtroopers trying to rack up their numbers. And then you have someone like Hank who like at the end of the day, he's trying to do a good thing, and he convinced himself that what he's doing is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I think that's up to wrap up our first podcast. Thank you all for joining. I've been Mikey Robinson.
Evan Wright.
And Carlos.
I'll see you all next time.